Pacific Northwest, one of the world's most important salmon fishing areas. Life of the salmon in this area goes forward in a continuous cycle. In shallow upstream areas of rivers from the Great Columbia north to the Fraser in Canada, the cycle is the same. In due time and at varying ages, the young salmon work their way downstream, feeding and growing as they move. At last, they reach the ocean. Here they remain for 2 to 5 years, feeding and growing to full size. Finally, driven by their instinct, they swim back up the streams to the same place where they themselves were spawned, lay their eggs and die, that a new race of salmon may take their place. This is the law of nature by which the salmon live. So it is that during the breeding season, the rivers are alive with salmon returning to the spawning grounds. But today, in many places, there are dams across the rivers, dams the salmon cannot pass when they try to swim upstream. It is a matter of life and death for the salmon to reach the upper river where they can reproduce. Where no means have been provided for the salmon to go around the dams, they battle with all their strength against the rushing water. But despite heroic efforts to leap the man-made barriers, the salmon, beaten and exhausted, are carried to shallow water where they die. Faced with the possible loss of an important source of food, men have been forced to look for other ways for the salmon to reproduce. One of the methods that is being tried is artificial breeding, a procedure that has been used with salmon for many years with varying success. When this method is used, salmon heading up the river are caught before they reach the dams that block their paths. Against this, too, the salmon struggle, but they are caught and they are killed so that the species can survive. The eggs that the female salmon would have struggled to take to the breeding grounds farther up the river are saved from the destruction that would await them at the dam. When the eggs are thoroughly mixed with sperm from the male salmon, baby fish can form just as they would do in the waters up the river. In the process of artificial breeding, the quantity of eggs obtained is always carefully measured so that records can be kept. And all of these first steps are handled on the banks of the streams right where the fish are caught. The next steps in the process take place at the state hatcheries. Here, a few hours later, the eggs that are not developing have turned a lifeless white, while the fertilized eggs are pink. These white eggs will not hatch, and they have no further use. It is easy to pick them out, leaving only the fertilized eggs that will hatch into young salmon. About 5 weeks later, the fish have started to form. The dark spots are eyes. Later, when the eggs have hatched, the salmon are taken to outside pools. After 3 months of feeding in the pools, the salmon have reached the point where they are ready to leave the hatchery. They are big enough and strong enough now to be taken to the rivers, the natural home of the salmon at this stage of their growth. Just as the eggs were measured when they were first obtained, the salmon leaving the hatcheries are also carefully measured so that records may be kept of the output. The journey from the hatchery to the river some distance away is made in trucks with special water tanks for carrying the young salmon. And now, from the tank truck through a hose to the river. Later on, the salmon will find their own way to the ocean, but the time will come in 2 to 5 years when the salmon will return to the river to breed their own young. When the salmon return to the rivers, that's when the fishing fleets are active. These boats operate off Puget Sound in the state of Washington. In the most common form of salmon fishing in this area, The boats carry huge nets that are ready to be set out as soon as the salmon are sighted. Time to set the net. A small boat called a sane skiff takes one end, and the huge net, 1,800 feet long and 100 feet deep, is let out over the stern of the fishing boat. The net is set out in a huge circle. Finally, the ends of the net are brought together again at the sane skiff. Cork floats hold up the top of the net, and lead weights hold down the lower part. As a winch pulls in the rope that runs through the brass rings, suspended below the lead weights, the bottom of the net closes. At the same time, the top of the net is gradually drawn in closer, and more of the heavy net is hauled aboard. Pulling in the net requires the work of all hands, and every man must be skilled in the task he's assigned. While the run of salmon is on, the crews work as fast as they can. As the net remaining in the water is gradually made smaller and smaller, the fish trapped inside are crowded close together. Now a smaller net, called a brail, is brought out ready for use. As the salmon are drawn in close against the side of the boat, the brail dips down into the swarm of twisting, squirming fish, and then is hoisted from the water by the fishing boat's power winch. As the brail is filled again and again, the salmon trapped in the larger net are taken aboard the fishing boat and dropped into the hold. Sometimes several thousand salmon are taken with one laying of the net. As soon as the net has been emptied of one haul of salmon, the fishermen prepare to set it out again. And so the operation continues time after time. Sometimes the salmon are brought from the ocean to the cannery in specially designed barges, so the fishing boats themselves can stay out and follow the salmon. In the process of unloading, huge buckets are used. Quickly filled with fish, they are hoisted to the top of the cannery, where they dump their loads of salmon into chutes. Workmen keep the salmon moving down to bins inside. From the bins inside the cannery, the salmon move onto conveyor belts. In the modern process of canning, many machines especially designed for the job are used. This one, for example, removes the heads of the fish. Another machine cuts off the fins and tails and cleans the salmon inside and out. The conveyor belt again, and presently the salmon receive a final cleaning by hand. Before the salmon can be packed in cans, they must be lined up for the machine that will cut them into sections of the proper size. Here the salmon move into the packing machine, and here are the cans to be filled. The machine does the work of packing, and out come the cans filled with salmon to be weighed by another machine as they pass by. Here and there a can may not be completely filled. The cans that are underweight receive their final packing by hand. The march along the conveyor belt continues as a machine counts the cans. Another machine seals the tops in place, and the cans pour onto a tray, ready for the huge steam pressure cookers. "90 minutes later, the cooking is complete, and the salmon ready to eat. But the cans are still very hot and have to be cooled by water before they are packed in cartons. And now the salmon from the waters of the Pacific Northwest is ready for the tables of America and the world, a product of the combined efforts of those who work in the fisheries, the fishing fleets, and the packing plants.